A wild horse cried for help, but the one who saved her wasn't human, and no one was prepared for what happened next. On a quiet morning in Montana, a wild horse sank into a deadly patch of mud, and the valley held its breath. But before any human could hear her fading cry, a small, trembling coyote stepped forward and did something no one believed possible. This is the story of how a forgotten creature became the only hope she had left. The first light over Madison Valley arrived like a shy guest, brushing the tall grasses with a pale gold that seemed almost embarrassed to wake the land. Morning mist clung to the low ground, stretching into long silver ribbons that drifted above the meadow. Nothing moved except the quiet sway of the prairie, breathing in its slow, ancient rhythm. Far in the distance, the snowcaps of the gravelly range caught the sun and glimmered like a row of old, patient guardians watching over the valley floor. The herd appeared only when the wind shifted, their silhouettes forming long, gentle strokes across the pale horizon. Wild horses moved without hurry, each step measured, each breath calm. They weren't performing for anyone. There was a dignity in the way they existed, a certainty carved by seasons harsher than the one waking behind them. Among them walked Willow, older, quieter, carrying the kind of grace that always comes after years of surviving storms no one else remembers. Her coat, once a bold silver gray, had softened into the color of river stones. Age had thinned her frame, but her strength hadn't faded. It had simply become quieter, more deliberate. Each movement she made felt intentional, like she had learned long ago that the world did not reward those who rushed. Even from afar, one could see the faint scar that crossed her shoulder, a pale reminder of the wildfire that had swept this valley 4 summers ago. Willow never sought pity. The valley had burned, and so had she. Yet here she was, alive, steady, present. While the rest of the herd grazed, Willow drifted away, drawn toward the water. Morning dew glistened on her muzzle as she lowered her head to sniff the air. She sensed something subtle in the breeze, the smell of damp soil, the faint chill from the Madison River, and a whisper of something else, something she couldn't name, like the quiet before a story goes wrong. Still, she walked on. Hooves pressed into the soft ground with barely a sound. The earth was tender from last night's scattered rain, but nothing unusual. The bison tracks nearby had filled with water, small mirrors catching pieces of sky. Willow stepped past them, heading for the shallow pool that formed near the old cottonwood stump every spring. The water there wasn't deep, but it was cool and familiar, a place she had returned to since she was young. The valley watched her, patient and wide. A hawk circled overhead, cutting shadows across her back. A light breeze carried the scent of sagebrush. Somewhere far off, a single cowbell clanged. One of the ranch herds grazing where the fences ran crooked and half collapsed. It was an ordinary morning, the kind that arrives without asking for attention. And yet, beneath Willow's feet, the ground breathed differently. She lowered her head to drink, but the waterline had shifted. The mud at the edges glistened, darker than usual, as if stirred from below. Willow paused, one ear flicked, then the other. She lifted her head slightly, nostrils flaring, reading the air the way only wild animals can. The earth felt unsettled. She took a step forward, then another. A few feet away, hidden behind a patch of dead reeds, a pair of yellowed eyes watched her, cautious, thin, tired. A lone coyote, ribs visible beneath its matted fur, crouched low in the grass. It didn't move, it barely breathed. The morning light revealed a notch missing from one ear, the kind of mark that comes from surviving one fight too many. It had seen Willow before, seen her kick, chase, drive predators away from the herd. Even now, the creature stayed low, expecting her to turn and force it to retreat. But Willow didn't notice it. Her attention was on the water, the mud, the trembling whisper of the land. She stepped closer. The coyote's ears flattened. A soft crack sounded, no louder than a twig snapping under a child's shoe. Willow froze. The earth gave a slow, warning sigh beneath her, a deep vibration spreading under her hooves like a whisper that had waited too long to be heard. The mud shifted, sliding an inch, then two. Willow lifted one leg to steady herself, but the ground dipped suddenly, sucking downward with a pull far stronger than any puddle should have had. The morning quiet shattered. Willow lurched as the ground collapsed under her chest. Mud surged upward, swallowing half her weight in a single, brutal motion. Instinct made her kick backward, but there was nothing solid to find. The slick earth refused her strength, pulling tighter each time she tried to rise. Her breath grew sharp, fast. Mud splattered across her neck as her body fought against the silent trap. Up on the bank, the coyote stood fully now, its thin frame trembling as it watched the horse sink deeper. It expected her to kick up a storm, to thrash, to scream the way prey animals do when they understand what comes next. But Willow didn't. Wild horses rarely cry, but the sound she released, low, raw, almost a morning hum, carried something the coyote had never heard. Not fear, not anger, but a plea so fragile it felt like the valley itself held still to listen. The coyote's breath hitched. Its paws shifted nervously in the wet grass. Instinct told it to run, leave, survive. That was what coyotes did. That was all they ever did. But something deeper tugged at its chest, as if the sound Willow made reached into an old, half-buried memory of loneliness, one the little creature knew too well. The coyote took a trembling step forward, then another. Then it turned and ran in the opposite direction, sprinting across the valley floor with desperate urgency, scattering droplets of rain from the grass as it fled toward the distant timberline where a man lived alone with his ghosts. And as it ran, Willow watched it go, her breath growing shorter, the mud reaching higher around her ribs, the morning sun dimming behind a slow-moving wall of gray. She didn't know where the coyote was going, but she knew one thing with the certainty of an animal who has seen too many storms. It was her only chance. And the ground beneath her shifted again, trying to pull her farther down. She closed her eyes just as the sky darkened a shade, unaware that the next chapter of her life had already begun. Carried on 4 trembling legs, running into the trees. The coyote ran as if the entire valley were collapsing behind it. Its paws slapped the wet earth, sending flecks of mud into the air. The morning haze had thickened into a gray veil, blurring the ridge lines and softening the shapes of the pines ahead. But the coyote kept its eyes fixed on the worn trail leading toward the timberline, where a cabin sat in the shadow of the forest, quiet, forgotten by most, except for the man who tried each day to forget himself inside it. Elias Turner didn't hear the first scratch at his door. The kettle on his small wood stove hissed, steaming the windows of his cabin until the outside world looked like a half-remembered dream. He sat at the table, hands wrapped around his mug, staring at a stack of old veterinary textbooks he had tucked beneath a pile of mail. He never threw them out, though he hadn't opened them in years. They felt like a debt he couldn't repay. A reminder of the life he walked away from. A soft thump broke the silence. Then another. Elias lifted his head. The sound wasn't the usual shuffle of deer or the scratchy tap of branches blowing against the siding. It was sharper, urgent, like small fists pounding in fear. When he opened the door, the coyote nearly fell inside. Rain clung to its fur in dark streaks, and its thin body trembled violently under the weight of whatever terror had chased it here. "Easy," Elias murmured, instinct tugging at him despite all his efforts to bury it. He crouched slowly, trying to make sense of why a wild coyote, usually skittish and wary, would come so close. The creature's eyes lifted, and in them Elias saw something he hadn't seen in a long time: desperation without aggression. A look that reminded him painfully of emergency calls he once handled: injured horses, trapped calves, even the occasional family pet brought in after an accident. Back then, life felt simpler. One problem, one solution, one shot at saving something fragile. But life wasn't simple anymore. Not since the day he misjudged a riverbank and watched a young mare disappear under the flood before he could reach her. The coyote tugged at his pant. Leg again, harder this time. "Show me," he said, because some part of him already knew this wasn't a random visit. Wild animals didn't come asking for help unless something had gone terribly wrong. The coyote bolted toward the tree line. Elias grabbed his coat from the hook, pulled on his boots, and followed. His steps were slower, heavier, but the urgency in the animal's movements kept him moving. The trail narrowed into a corridor of pine needles, their scent sharp and clean, cutting through the dampness. The air grew colder. Rain dripped from the branches like beads of glass. The coyote paused only to look back and make sure he was still coming. Elias's breath puffed white in the frigid air, and for the first time that morning he felt the valley urging him forward, quietly, insistently, like he was needed somewhere. As they climbed the ridge, the distant rumble of the river reached him, but beneath it, Elias began to hear something else, a deeper, slower pulse in the earth, a heaviness he hadn't felt since the flood years ago. The coyote's pace quickened. "Something's hurt," he whispered to himself, the words tasting like the past. His mind flicked through worst-case scenarios as if old reflexes had never left him. Broken leg, exposure, hypothermia, maybe even a trapped animal from a recent storm. His training buzzed through him like an engine turning over after years of sitting idle. But whatever was ahead, it was big. The fear in the coyote's body told him that much. They reached the final stretch of trail just as the sky dimmed further, turning the valley into a muted canvas of gray-blue tones. The storm clouds weren't close, but they were coming fast, a sign of unstable weather patterns he'd been monitoring for weeks, something insurers and local ranchers talked about constantly, worried about flash floods and property damage. Elias had ignored most of their chatter. Now he wished he hadn't. The coyote broke into a sprint. Elias followed, heart pounding. When he stepped out onto the slope overlooking the pool, everything inside him seized. Willow, though he did not yet know her name, was half submerged in the earth, chest deep in a pool of dark mud that churned sluggishly around her. Her body sagged with exhaustion. The mud had swallowed her almost to the ribs, and each attempt to lift her weight only pulled her deeper. Her breath came in short, painful bursts, her entire frame trembling. Rainwater gathered at the edge of the pool, threatening to spill in. Elias froze. His throat tightened. His knees felt weak. It was the same image, the same cruel shape of despair he had seen years ago when that young mare slipped beneath the swollen river. A horse fighting alone. A man arriving too late. The memory punched through him with such force he gripped a tree trunk to steady himself. The coyote stood only a few feet from the edge, tail low, body shaking. It looked at Elias, then at the horse, then back. Again, as if demanding he move, act, do something. Elias took a step forward and sank slightly in the soft ground. The valley was warning him, but the horse's labored breath drowned everything else out. He crouched, studying the scene the way he used to, calculating risks, escape angles, structural weaknesses in the soil. This wasn't just mud. It was a collapsing pocket, one fed by groundwater and worsened by last night's rain. A wrong move could bring the whole edge down on top of the animal. "All right," he whispered, voice tight with fear and focus. "I hear you." Willow turned her head slightly. Mud streaked across her cheek, and her eye, clouded with pain but not panic, met his. There was no blame in it, only the quiet pleading of a creature who had fought long enough. Elias swallowed hard. His hand shook once, then steadied. He reached into his jacket pocket, where he kept an old multi-tool he hadn't used in years. It felt lighter than he remembered, or perhaps he had grown heavier with doubt. The coyote stepped closer to the pit, emitting a low whine. "Easy," Elias murmured. "I'm not going anywhere." His boots sank another inch as he moved closer to the edge. He tested the ground with the caution of a man who had learned the price of one wrong step. The rain thickened to a steady drizzle, soaking his shoulders, matting his hair against his forehead. The smell of wet earth mixed with the scent of horse sweat and fear, a combination that once defined his entire career. "Hang on," he said quietly. The words meant as much for himself as for her. Willow blinked slowly, her breath fogging the cold air. The coyote paced anxiously, whining at each sound the mud made as it tightened its grip. Elias lowered himself to one knee, staring at the trembling edge of the earth. He had been here before, but this time he wasn't alone. And as the rain dripped from the brim of his coat, he whispered the first words that nudged the story toward its next chapter. "I'm going to get you out. I promise." The rain softened the valley into a muted watercolor as Elias inched closer to the trembling edge. The mud pit below no longer looked like a simple patch of soft ground. It looked alive, breathing, pulling, tightening around the horse's sinking body. Willow's chest rose and fell in shallow, uneven rhythms, each breath sounding like it had to travel through miles of exhaustion just to reach daylight. Her legs trembled under the weight of the mud's relentless pull. She tried once to shift her weight, but the movement only sent her sinking another inch. Elias steadied himself by gripping a low root exposed from the bank. His fingers curled around it, cold water running between his knuckles as he tested the stability of the soil. The root held, but the ground beneath it gave a warning tremor, faint but unmistakable, like the valley whispering that time was shorter than he realized. Behind him, the coyote paced in a tight circle, its whines growing sharper each time Willow's body twitched. The little creature's paws pressed into the wet earth, leaving small, frantic prints that washed away almost immediately. Elias glanced back once. Rain matted the coyote's fur to its ribs, and for a brief moment Elias felt something deep in his chest twist. This wasn't an animal running on instinct anymore. It was running on something closer to heartbreak. He returned his focus to Willow. Her eye met his again, but this time it held a dullness that hadn't been there minutes earlier. A slow surrender, a quiet apology to the world for not being able to fight longer. "No," Elias murmured under his breath, voice cracking just slightly. "Don't you dare!" He reached further, trying to gauge where he could anchor himself. Every option felt temporary, like the land was shifting beneath him faster than his thoughts could keep up. His heartbeat drummed louder against the quiet rain. He forced himself to breathe slowly, searching the ground with the precision he used to rely on during emergency rescues. Before fear and regret made him step away from this kind of work. A gust of wind swept across the meadow, bending the long grasses and sending ripples through the surface of the rain-pocked pool. As the wind pressed against him, Elias could smell the faint trace of willow bark carried by the storm, the same scent he used to mix for injured horses. It hit him hard enough to make him swallow the ache rising in his throat. He leaned a little farther, the mud brushing the edge of his boots. Willow felt the movement or heard it. Either way, she lifted her head with an almost fragile hope. Her nostrils flared weakly. The sound escaping her throat wasn't a cry, but a low tremor that vibrated through the waterlogged air, a sound that made the coyote stop pacing altogether. "That's it," Elias whispered, inching forward. "Stay with me." He didn't realize until then how cold his hands were, how unfamiliar they felt doing something he once knew so well. The valley had a way of aging people faster, but guilt aged them twice as fast. A sudden shift in the mud snapped him out of the thought. Willow's hind leg disappeared deeper. The ground let out a sickening slurp, and water surged around her flank. Her body jolted. The pain in her shoulder, whatever wound lay beneath the mud, made her collapse momentarily. Her head dipped dangerously low, her chin nearly touching the sludge. Elias lunged instinctively, catching himself on his hand before he toppled into the pit with her. The coyote barked, a sharp, urgent sound, its entire body trembling as if it expected the earth to swallow them both. "Easy," Elias snapped, though his voice wasn't anger. It was fear wearing a thin mask of command. "Hold on, just hold on." Willow tried to lift her head again. Muscles along her neck fluttered like frayed rope. Her ears flicked once, then drooped. The rain, coming down her face, made it difficult to tell where water ended and pain began. Elias's pulse hammered in his throat. He scanned the slope behind him, searching for anything that could help. A fallen branch, a length of vine, a dry patch of earth. Nothing presented itself. The world around him felt stripped bare. He reached deeper into the pocket of his coat and pulled out the only thing he had, a coil of thin rope he used for small repairs around the cabin. It wasn't much. It wasn't enough. But it was something. And sometimes something was what kept breath inside a creature that deserved another sunrise. He tied a quick loop, testing its strength. The rope was old, worn in places. But the knot held firm. "It's not perfect," he told the horse, even though she couldn't understand the words. "But you're not going to die here, not today." As he leaned over the edge to slip the rope beneath her neck, the ground beneath him cracked, a crisp, slicing sound that split through the valley like lightning. Elias jerked back just in time as a section of the bank collapsed into the pit, sending a dark wave of mud rolling toward Willow's face. The coyote yelped and sprang backward. Willow didn't move. For a heartbeat, Elias felt everything inside him go still. He couldn't breathe, couldn't think. The valley disappeared around him, leaving only the sinking horse and the memory of his past failure rising up like a ghost. "No," he whispered again, more a plea than a word. "Not again." He pressed one hand into the ground, ignoring the way it trembled beneath him, and leaned forward just enough. His fingers brushed Willow's wet cheek. The contact was fleeting, but it sparked life back into her eyes. She blinked. A small breath escaped her, strained but present. "That's it. Stay with me. I'm not losing you." Elias repositioned himself, sliding one leg behind a thick exposed root for leverage. The coyote eased closer again, watching him with a fierce intensity that felt almost human. Together they waited for the mud to settle, just enough for Elias to try again. The valley held its breath around them, mist rising from the earth like a thin prayer. The rain softened. The river murmured somewhere in the distance. And Willow, with every ounce of strength she had left, lifted her head just enough for Elias to slip the rope beneath her neck. When he pulled it gently into place, she exhaled, a long, trembling sigh that felt like the first fragile thread tying all three of their fates together. And the moment he tightened the knot, the next chapter began to unfold in the shifting air behind him. The rope tightened slowly around Willow's neck, not enough to hurt her, but enough to remind both of them that something in this quiet valley had shifted, something fragile, trembling, and impossibly important. Elias held the end of the rope with both hands, knuckles whitening as the old fibers dug into his skin. He had forgotten how it felt to hold life quite literally in his grip, forgotten the weight of trust, especially the kind given without a single spoken word. Willow's breath was shallow but steady, fogging the damp air with each exhale. Her ears twitched weakly as droplets of rain slid down her long face. Mud clung to her cheeks like bruises. The storm clouds above gathered in thick layers, softening the light until the whole valley looked like a fading photograph, quiet, gray, and suspended between two heartbeats. The coyote remained near the edge, its thin body tense, tail lowered almost to the ground. It watched Elias with a sharp intelligence, stepping closer only when Willow trembled or when the mud let out another sickening gulp. The small creature seemed to understand more than any human would have expected. It wasn't just waiting. It was willing him forward, begging him without a sound to keep trying. Elias tested the line with a firm pull, grounding his boots into the wet soil. The rope held, though every instinct warned him it wasn't strong enough for what he needed to do. He'd reinforced the knot around Willow's neck, but one knot couldn't undo the pull of a collapsing earth. This wasn't a cast or a cut or a broken bone. This was nature devouring one of its own. Willow shifted slightly, her flank trembling under the cold suction of the mud. The movement made a deep ripple spread outward, and the pit responded by tightening around her torso. Elias felt the ground vibrate beneath him. It was the kind of vibration he remembered from the riverbank years ago. Subtle, terrifying, the signal that the earth had begun to make decisions for him. He swallowed hard. "Hold on. Just hold on." His voice was low, almost swallowed by the wind, but Willow blinked at the sound, as if anchoring herself to it. He glanced up at the sky. The storm had not broken yet, but the clouds were stacking in heavy sheets, darkening with each passing minute. The valley was running out of light. Willow was running out of time. He braced himself against the route he'd used before. The route was slick now, slicker than it had been moments ago, the rain turning it into something treacherous. Still, he leaned back, using his weight to coax Willow's head and neck upward. The rope grew taut, humming with tension. Willow responded, not with a surge of strength, but with the gentlest lift of her head. Her ears tipped forward, and she inhaled with effort. Elias felt that breath travel through the rope, felt the life still pulsing inside her, faint but stubborn. "That's it. You're with me," he whispered. But the valley wasn't cooperating. The ground beneath Willow gave another subtle shift, pulling at her ribs, dragging her deeper. Mud rose around her flank, thickening with each quiet collapse of the pit. Elias felt panic rise inside him, a tight, familiar panic he had spent years avoiding. His heartbeat hammered against his ribs like a warning bell. He took a breath that steadied almost nothing inside him. "No," he said firmly, this time not to Willow, not even to himself, but to the valley, as if the land owed him a second chance. He pulled the rope again, harder. Willow's body strained, her front legs twitching violently against the suction. She tried to gather herself, but the mud clung mercilessly, unwilling to release what it had claimed. The ground behind Elias gave a low groan. A hairline fracture appeared near his right boot, snaking toward the slope like a crack spreading through old porcelain. He jerked back instinctively, adjusting his footing. The coyote barked, a sharp, alarmed sound, and scurried backward a few steps. "Okay, okay." Elias forced himself still, breathing through his teeth. "We do this slow." He repositioned himself again, shifting his weight toward a more stable section of the bank. Cold water seeped into the seams of his boots. His knees were soaked. His coat clung to him like a heavy second skin. The storm might not have reached them yet, but its first warnings had already arrived in the rain's sharper rhythm. As he leaned forward again, the coyote moved closer. Close enough now that Elias could see the small scar running across its muzzle, the uneven rise of its rib cage. This animal had survived things Willow never would have imagined. And now, somehow, it had chosen to stand guard over a horse that once drove it away. Elias let out a slow breath. "You chose the right person," he murmured softly to the coyote, "but I need more than belief." He scanned the area around him. The slope was steep, but not impossible. If he could reach that cluster of saplings 10 feet away, he might create an anchor point strong enough to counter the mud's pull. But reaching those saplings required crossing a slick stretch of earth that looked ready to collapse under a feather's weight. Willow let out a shuddering breath. Her body dipped lower. Elias's decision came instantly. He dropped to his hands and knees and crawled along the edge, the rope secured around his forearm. Every inch forward threatened to give way. He could feel the land shifting, the soil sliding lightly beneath his palms. But the saplings held fast, their roots gripping the earth with a strength he prayed was enough. When he reached them, he looped the rope around the thickest trunk. His hands were numb, slipping on the wet fibers, but he managed to pull the knot tight, tight enough to bite into the bark. He crouched, bracing himself. "Come on, girl," he whispered, pulling with everything he had. "Don't surrender." For a moment, nothing happened. Then Willow's body shifted, just slightly, but enough for the mud to react. It tightened again, pulling hard, but the sapling held. Elias felt the rope slip through his hands and grabbed it until his palms burned. Willow lifted her head another inch. Her nostrils flared. A tremor ran through her entire frame. Elias pulled harder, teeth clenched, the rope vibrating with the battle between force and surrender. His boots dug into the wet soil. His breath came in ragged bursts. The coyote edged forward, whining, then barking again, a desperate, rhythmic sound that matched the valley's rising tension. And then, for the first time since he'd arrived, Elias felt it, the slightest upward give in Willow's weight. She wasn't free, not even close, but she was fighting again. And as the storm gathered above them, he braced himself for what came next. For a long moment, Elias didn't breathe. The tiny shift he felt through the rope, so subtle, so fragile, was enough to light something inside him that had been dark for years. Willow was fighting, not with force, but with a flicker of instinct older than the mountains surrounding them. It was the kind of instinct that rises only when a creature understands the difference between surrender and that last thin thread of hope. The rope hummed with tension as Elias leaned back, anchoring himself against the sapling. His boots carved deeper into the wet soil, mud swallowing his heels. Water trickled down his spine beneath his coat, cold enough to sting. The storm clouds thickened overhead, lowering like a ceiling that wanted to press the world into silence. Willow's chest rose again, deeper this time. Her ears flicked in uneven rhythm, as if responding to some distant echo in the valley. She gathered her strength just long enough to shift her right leg. The movement broke another layer of suction, sending a slow wave of mud rolling around her ribs. The coyote backed up with a startled hop, then crouched low, tail tucked but eyes locked on her. It let out a soft, desperate yip, the kind that carried through rain like a plea wrapped in sound. Something in its posture looked almost afraid that Willow's effort might stop at any moment. "Easy," Elias whispered, though he wasn't sure if the word was for Willow or himself. His fingers tightened on the rope until the fibers cut faint lines into his skin. The knot around the sapling held, but the strain was growing. Water from the storm dripped heavier now, turning the slope into slick clay. Each breath Elias took tasted of earth and adrenaline. He could feel the past pressing at him, memories crowding out reason. He blinked them away. This wasn't then. Willow wasn't the horse he lost. This was now, and now still gave him a chance. A gust of wind punched through the ravine, rattling the thin branches above them. The smell of coming rain sharpened in the air, carrying hints of river water and wet stone. Elias tilted his head slightly, listening. The rush of the Madison River in the distance had changed pitch. It was no longer a steady murmur. It was rising. The storm was coming faster than he thought. He swallowed, tasting the metallic edge of fear. "We don't have long," he murmured. Willow blinked slowly, her lashes clumped with rain. Her breath trembled as she lifted her head another inch. Mud peeled away from her neck in thick, heavy sheets. Her legs twitched again, struggling for leverage she didn't have. Elias shifted his stance, placing one knee firmly against the sapling's base. His muscles burned under the effort, but he leaned back harder, coaxing every inch of upward movement he could get. Willow's nostrils flared. For a brief second, Elias saw fire in her, the same stubborn spark he'd seen in injured animals that refused to die quietly. Her shoulder quivered, her jaw clenched. She pushed. The mud tightened. She pushed harder. Then she stopped. Her body sagged all at once, like someone had cut the last strings holding her up. Her head dropped back into the hollow she'd carved with her own weight. A low, broken sound escaped her throat. Not a cry, not even a grunt. Just a tired, trembling exhale that made the coyote press its belly flat to the earth in distress. "No, no, stay with me." Elias pulled the rope again, but her body didn't respond. He felt the shift of her weight sink deeper, the mud reclaiming what little ground she'd taken. Panic surged in him, raw and sudden. The coyote barked sharply, the sound slicing through the rising wind. "Quiet," Elias breathed, though his voice trembled. "Let me think." He scanned the slope, nothing but mud, rocks, and storm-darkened sky. But then his eyes caught something, faint movement through the curtain of rain. A vehicle, headlights cutting a weak glow through the gray. The sound followed a heartbeat later, an engine struggling against the terrain. Elias exhaled in something like disbelief. "Claire!" The coyote turned its head sharply, ears raised. The truck climbed the ridge slowly, tires skidding on wet stone. Claire Abbott leaned forward as she drove, squinting through the rain. Even from this distance, Elias could see the set of her jaw. The woman always drove like she was outrunning something, even when she wasn't. She braked hard when she saw him, the truck skidding to a stop. Claire jumped out before the engine fully died, boots splashing into the wet ground. Her dark braid clung to her shoulder as she jogged toward him, her expression going from confusion to alarm in seconds when she spotted Willow. "Elias! Oh, my God!" She slid to her knees beside him. "How long has she been like this?" "Long enough," he answered, voice low. "But she's still trying." Claire's gaze flicked to the rope, then to the sapling. "That won't hold if she panics." "I know." "And the ground is ready to go." "I know." "And the river." "I know." His voice cracked, softer than a shout, but deeper than a whisper. He swallowed hard. "But she's alive. That's all that matters." Claire stared at him for a moment, really stared, like she was seeing pieces of him he hadn't shown in years. Then she nodded once, sharp and sure. "Tell me what you need." Elias exhaled shakily, relief layered over fear. "We don't have much, just the rope and the truck, and whatever's in your emergency kit." Claire stood, wiping rain from her cheeks. "Then we make it work." Behind them, Willow's breath faltered again. The coyote whimpered, stepping so close to the pit that its paws nearly slid in. Elias tightened his grip on the rope, his body leaning into its tension as if trying to shield her from the valley itself. Claire crouched at his side again. "Elias, she's slipping." "I know," his voice broke, "but I'm not letting her go." Rain thickened, thunder rumbled far off. The valley darkened another shade, as if bracing for what came next. And as the wind blew across Willow's trembling body, Elias whispered to her through the storm, "You're not alone anymore." He didn't know if she heard it. But the coyote did, its ears flicking toward him, eyes steady, as if holding those words in place until Willow could gather enough strength to hear them herself. The storm gathered itself in a low growl above the valley, the kind of sound that made even the pines tighten their branches. Elias braced his shoulder against the rope again, trying to keep Willow's head above the rising sludge. Claire was already digging through the emergency kit, her fingers quick despite the cold numbing her knuckles. The coyote paced beside her, circling anxiously, its fur slicked tight against its fragile frame. Willow let out another trembling breath that wavered in the heavy air. Elias leaned closer, one hand brushing the wet strands of her mane away from her eyes. The horse didn't flinch. Her gaze was unfocused, drifting in and out as if she were listening to something beyond them, a call carried on the wind or the memory of the world before the mud swallowed half her body. "Stay with me," he whispered, his voice cracking more than he intended. Claire knelt beside him, pressing a small coil of cord into his free hand. "This might help stabilize her front leg," she said. "If we can get something under her chest, she might gain a bit of leverage." Elias studied the cord. It was sturdy, meant for gear repair or light loads. Not meant for a horse, not meant for 1,000 pounds of muscle fighting against a pit of earth determined to drag her under. But nothing about this rescue had been ideal. "We try," he murmured. Claire nodded once and moved to the other side of the pit, careful to test each step before committing her weight. The rain made the slope treacherous, slick and unpredictable. Mud clung to her boots like a warning. Elias watched her angle herself, her posture steady, her jaw tightened in concentration. "Tell me when," she said. Elias tightened his grip on the rope. "On my count. 1, 2... Before he reached 3, a new vibration rolled under his feet. Subtle at first, then stronger, shaking the loose stones scattered along the rim. Claire froze. The coyote stiffened, ears pinned flat. Willow's eyes widened faintly, sensing the shift long before the humans did. A deep rumble echoed across the ridge. Claire looked up toward the trail. "Elias, do you hear that?" He did, and it wasn't thunder, a steady rhythm, heavy, uneven hoofbeats, pounded through the mud-softened earth. Not the quick, frantic pattern of a spooked deer, not the scatter of elk. This was slower, older, a gait that carried both age and purpose. Elias turned toward the sound just as a shadow emerged through the curtain of rain. A horse, thin, soaked, and weather-beaten, made its way down the slope. At first, Elias thought the storm was playing tricks on his eyes, but then the horse stepped into clearer view, and Claire inhaled a sharp breath. It wasn't Willow's herd. It was a Mustang, alone. Its coat was the color of dark rusted iron, streaked with rain and mud. Its mane hung in heavy ropes. A faint white scar traced the length of its shoulder. Its ribs showed, but its eyes burned with something unmistakably alive. Recognition, memory, maybe even fear. Elias felt his throat tighten. "I've seen him before." Claire shot him a quick glance. "Recently?" "No," he murmured. "Years ago." The Mustang stopped a few feet away, surveying the scene with an eerie quiet. The coyote let out a low whine, but didn't back away. The Mustang lowered its head, sniffing the air, a slow, deliberate motion. When its gaze reached Willow, something in its posture changed. There was no threat, no dominance, only a stillness that went straight to Elias's chest like a forgotten ache. "He knows her," Claire whispered. Elias didn't respond. He wasn't sure he had words. All he knew was the Mustang had no reason to approach humans, no reason to come this close to a dangerous pit. Yet here it was, drawn by something older than instinct. The coyote took a tentative step closer to Elias, as if urging him to act. Elias nodded once, almost imperceptibly. "Claire," he said softly, "we anchor the primary rope to the truck, the secondary line." His hand trembled slightly as he pointed to the Mustang. "We might need a counterweight." Claire blinked rain from her lashes. "Elias, he's wild." "I know." He swallowed. "But look at him." The Mustang stood with its weight distributed evenly, steady as an old stone pillar. Even the storm couldn't shake him. He wasn't spooked. He wasn't confused. He was waiting, the same way the coyote had waited. The rain thickened, drumming against the soaked earth, as Claire moved quickly to the truck, hauling the rope with practiced efficiency. The coyote stayed close to Elias, watching every movement he made. Willow stirred again, her breath coming in short, ragged bursts. Mud crept higher along her ribs. She closed her eyes for a moment, and Elias felt something inside him crumble. "Don't," he whispered. "Not yet. Not now." He wrapped the secondary rope carefully, slowly, his movements measured, to avoid startling the Mustang. But the horse stood perfectly still, lowering its head as Elias approached, as if offering its strength without being asked. "Good boy," Elias said quietly, voice warm despite the cold rain. "Just hold steady." The Mustang didn't flinch when the rope slid around its chest. It didn't shy away when Elias tightened the knot. It simply breathed, deep and slow, like it understood what was being asked of it. Claire returned, boots slipping slightly in the mud as she hurried back to the pit. "The truck's anchored," she said. "Lines are ready." Elias nodded. "Then we do this together." He took his position beside the rope, Claire to his right, the Mustang to his left. The coyote stood behind him, trembling but vigilant. Elias exhaled. "On 3, he said, voice steadying. 1, 2, 3. The valley responded first. A gust of wind swept across them. Then the ropes tightened. Claire leaned back, digging her heels into the wet soil. Elias braced his shoulders, pulling with every ounce of strength he had left. The Mustang stepped forward, not panicked, but deliberate, adding its weight to the line. Willow's head lifted, her neck strained. Her body shuddered violently as the mud resisted, pulling her downward with stubborn cruelty. "Come on," Elias breathed. "Come on, fight." The Mustang planted its hooves deeper and pulled again, a raw surge of strength passing through the rope. Willow's front leg broke free, just an inch, just enough to make hope flare bright and painful in Elias's chest. And as the storm shadowed the valley in a deeper shade of gray, he whispered the words that would carry them into the next desperate moment. "She's moving. Keep going. She's moving. Keep going." Elias barely heard his own voice over the sudden rush of wind barreling through the valley. The storm had finally begun to wake, pushing cold air down the ridge like a warning. The rope stretched near its limit, vibrating with the weight of a creature fighting both gravity and the earth that refused to release her. Willow's front leg, freed by mere inches, trembled violently as she tried to press it into something, anything, that felt solid. Claire's breath came out in sharp bursts as she leaned her full weight against her line. Mud coated her jeans, streaking upward each time she shifted her footing. The truck behind her growled under the strain, tires locked, engine chugging in low idle as the rope anchored to its tow bar tightened further. Elias could feel every movement through the rope, each muscle in Willow's body trembling like frayed wire. "Again," he said, bracing himself. The Mustang answered before either human could react. It stepped backward, hooves digging deep into the wet soil, adding a slow, steady pull that reverberated through the rope like a pulse. Rain slid down its mane, and for a moment its body looked carved from iron, unyielding, deliberate, loyal to a creature it owed nothing to but memory. Willow's head lifted another inch. Her breath stuttered. Her neck strained in one long trembling arc toward the sky, as if reaching for the life she could feel slipping. "You've got her!" Claire shouted, fighting the wind. "Keep tension steady!" But the valley was no longer steady. Water began seeping from the higher ridge, gathering into thin rivulets that snaked down the slope toward the pit. The first thread of water reached the rim and vanished into the mud with a faint hiss. Elias felt the ground soften beneath him, the soil loosening around his boots as the storm fed the earth. "We're losing time," he called out, his voice barely carrying over the wind. Willow shifted again, the movement sending thick ripples through the mud. Her hindquarters were still trapped, her back legs invisible beneath the dark surface. But her chest rose higher now. The rope dug into the mud near her shoulder, and for a brief second Elias caught the flash of raw determination in her eye, the spark that had kept her alive through wildfire, winter, and loss. "You're still with us," he murmured. "Good girl." The coyote was trembling beside him, tiny paws pushing against the dirt as if it wanted to help pull the rope. Its yellowed eyes flicked from Willow to Elias, then to the water inching closer down the slope. A soft, urgent whine escaped its throat. Elias followed its gaze. The river runoff was accelerating, the small rivulets joining into a thin stream, curling toward the pit like fingers seeking the lowest ground. Claire saw it too. "If the water hits the center, the mud's going to liquefy." "And she'll drop," Elias finished, breath tightening. "We can't let that happen." He gave the rope another firm pull, but the mud answered with a wet, snarling sound. Willow's body jerked slightly, then sank a fraction deeper into the rear portion of the pit. The Mustang snorted loudly, ears flattening as it felt the shift through the rope. It braced harder, pulling again in one long, controlled motion. Willow's upper body lifted high enough that her front hooves broke free of the sludge. Mud poured from her legs like thick ink. Her breath came wild and ragged, her eyes going wide as instinct battled exhaustion. "She's gaining leverage," Claire cried. But before hope could settle, the earth gave its own response. A chunk of the rim caved in as a surge of water struck it, collapsing a section of mud straight toward Willow's flank. The splash sent a spray of cold sludge across Elias's coat. Willow jolted, her body twisting as the mud around her legs thinned dangerously. "Hold her," Elias yelled. "Don't let her roll." The Mustang lunged backward, pulling with a power that jolted the rope tight. Claire leaned with it, muscles straining. Elias dragged his body sideways, planting both heels deep into the mud to create a makeshift anchor with his own weight. Willow's torso rose again, but this time her back legs broke free of the suction all at once, releasing with a grotesque slurp that sent her body tipping sideways. "Easy, easy," Elias called out, guiding the rope with both hands. She crashed against the slope, her hooves scrambling for footing on the slick earth. Mud flew in every direction. She slid several inches, too close to the new watery section, but her front legs finally found a patch of firmer ground. "Come on," Claire urged. "Push up." Willow tried. Her body trembled violently under the effort. Her knees buckled once, nearly sending her backward into the pit. The Mustang reared its head and stepped backward again, dragging her just enough so that her front hooves caught the uneven ground. For a full, suspended moment, she remained frozen, half sprawled, half kneeling, her body shuddering like she couldn't decide whether she had strength left to stand. Then her ear flicked. Just a tiny twitch. The kind of twitch that animals make when they recognize something. Hope, maybe, or the faint echo of survival instinct, rising one more time. Up Elias whispered, barely audible. "Up, girl." The coyote let out a sharp bark, one single punctured note of urgency. Willow pushed. Her hooves slipped. She pushed again. Her chest lifted first, then her shoulders, her neck straining as she fought gravity and mud and fear. Claire gasped. "She's rising! Elias, she's actually—" A crack of thunder cut her voice in half. Willow staggered, caught herself, then rose another inch. The Mustang stepped back one final time, pulling the line taut like a heartbeat held in rope. Willow heaved every last part of herself upward, and for the first time since the valley swallowed her, her front legs stood fully beneath her weight, shaking, splayed, and fragile, but standing. Rain fell harder, striking the earth in sharp, cold needles that pinged against metal and stone. Elias didn't speak. Claire didn't breathe. The Mustang didn't move. The coyote didn't blink. They all watched the same miracle rising before them. Slow, trembling, but undeniable. Willow was not free. Not yet. But she was no longer drowning. And the valley, for the briefest moment, seemed to pause, waiting to see if she could take the next breath. For a breathless moment, Willow stood frozen on trembling front legs, her body caught between collapse and resurrection. Rain hammered the slope, washing thin streaks of mud down her chest and pooling beneath her hooves. The wind pressed against her flank with a restless urgency, as if the storm itself wasn't sure whether it should help lift her or shove her back into the earth that had nearly swallowed her whole. Elias didn't dare move. Neither did Claire. Even the Mustang remained absolutely still, its body rigid with the kind of instinctive awareness older than any of them. The coyote crouched low beside. Elias, pupils wide, trembling with some mix of fear and hope only animals understood. "Easy," Elias murmured, though his voice sounded smaller than the storm around them. Willow shifted, just an inch. Her knee buckled, dipping her shoulder. Mud slid beneath her hoof in a thin, treacherous layer. The rope tightened abruptly as her weight pulled downward. Claire gasped, scrambling to keep tension even. The Mustang dug its hooves deeper, muscles coiling with raw power as it leaned its weight backward, pulling her upward again. Willow's head jerked slightly at the sudden counterforce, but she held. Her nostrils flared. A hoarse sound escaped her throat, half gasp, half groan, something that lived between pain and the refusal to surrender. Elias swallowed hard. That's it, girl. You're above it now. You're above it." She wasn't. Not fully. The mud still hugged her hindquarters like wet cement. Every movement risked sliding her back into the pit, where the water creeping down the slope gathered with the patience of something that knew it didn't need to hurry. The first thin sheet of runoff from the ridge reached the pit's edge and slipped silently into the hole, making the mud shimmer with darker currents. Claire followed the stream with her eyes. "If the water keeps rising—" "It won't," Elias said sharply, interrupting more out of desperation than confidence. He didn't want to give the fear shape by naming it, not when Willow was balanced on such a fragile line between life and disappearance. Willow took a shuddering breath. Her ears twitched. She leaned forward, trying to shift her weight onto her front hooves. Her body trembled so hard Elias felt the vibrations through the rope, through the wet earth beneath him, through every muscle in his arms. Claire stepped forward a few inches, careful not to slide. If she pushes now, she might. Another crack of thunder swallowed her words. Willow flinched. Her hooves slipped. The ground lurched under her. Elias lunged instinctively, bracing the rope around his forearm. Claire dropped into a half-crouch, anchoring the secondary line. The Mustang jerked backward with startling strength, its chest rising as it dug against the earth, refusing to let her fall. But the slope betrayed them. A slab of wet soil sheared away from the hillside near Willow's hind legs, collapsing into the pit. Mud surged back toward her in a thick, sucking wave. "No, no, no! Hold her!" Elias shouted, voice ragged. Willow's back leg vanished into the shifting sludge. Her body tilted dangerously. Her weight pulled hard against the rope, nearly jerking Elias off balance. The Mustang reared its head, stepping back even farther, muscles flexing in long, powerful lines beneath its soaked coat. The coyote scrambled closer to Willow, barking sharply, short, frantic bursts urging her forward. Its paws splattered mud as it paced, trying to find a place where it could anchor. Itself beside her, though its small body could do little more than bear witness. Willow's head dipped. Her chest sagged. For a terrifying moment Elias saw her surrender. The storm muted into a distant roar, and all he could hear was his own heartbeat beating through the rope. "No," he whispered, stepping closer to the edge than he should. "Not like this. Not after all this." He tugged the rope sharply, not pulling her, but waking her. Willow's ears flicked weakly. Another breath. A deeper one. She shifted again, this time more determined. Her hoof scraped against the slope, fighting for a hold. Claire strained against her line. "She's trying! Elias, she's actually trying!" Willow's shoulder rose first, then her chest. Mud poured off her like dark water. Her back legs kicked once, weak but purposeful. Her hooves found the collapsing edge of the slope and slipped. She kicked again. This time they caught. "Pull!" Elias cried. The Mustang threw its weight backward in one long, decisive step that sent a shock of motion through the rope. Claire leaned back so hard her boots skidded an inch before she dug deeper. Elias pulled with every muscle he had left, the rope burning against his palms. Willow's body lifted, slowly, painfully, like the valley was reluctant to give her back. Her hindquarters broke through the surface of the pit. Mud cascaded around her legs in heavy sheets. She stumbled sideways, scrambling. Elias nearly lost his footing when she lurched toward him, but he anchored his shoulder against the sapling and held. Then, suddenly, no sound, no dramatic moment, she was out, all four legs beneath her, shaking, filthy, barely standing, alive. Willow staggered, nearly collapsing onto her side, but the Mustang stepped closer, angling its body to brace her flank. The gesture was subtle, instinctive, like a memory passing between them on the wind. Claire exhaled a sob she didn't know she'd been holding. The coyote stopped trembling long enough to sit back on its haunches, tail flicking in exhausted relief. Elias lowered the rope, arms numb, chest heaving. He stepped toward Willow, but froze when she lifted her head, not to him, but to the Mustang. Through the sheets of rain, Willow's gaze steadied on him. The old Mustang breathed slowly, lowering its head in return. The moment hung there, suspended, quiet despite the storm, a silent exchange older than language. A moment that made the valley feel like it was listening. Elias stepped forward then, gently placing his hand against Willow's neck. Her skin was warm beneath the mud, her pulse fragile but steady. "You're safe," he whispered. But the valley wasn't done with them yet. Behind him, Claire's eyes shot upward, widening. "Elias, look!" The runoff from the ridge had thickened into a fast-moving stream, and it was heading straight for the place they were standing. The sound reached them first, a low, rolling hiss, like thousands of tiny beads tumbling down a metal roof. Elias turned just in time to see the runoff become a rushing sheet of water, spreading wide, gathering speed. The storm had broken somewhere higher on the ridge, releasing a sudden surge that had taken minutes, not hours, to reach them. Now it raced downward in a shallow, fast-moving wave, churning earth and branches as it came. Claire stepped back instinctively. "Elias, move her, now!" Willow lifted her head weakly at the rising noise. Her legs wobbled beneath her, barely able to hold her weight. Mud streamed off her sides in heavy ribbons, each step she took sinking slightly into the unstable slope. She was exhausted, so exhausted that even fear didn't come with strength anymore. Only instinct. The Mustang, sensing the shift in the air, swung its head toward the oncoming water and snorted sharply. It stepped sideways, placing its body between Willow and the slope, as if guiding her without touch. The coyote darted around their legs, paws splashing through the thinning mud, yipping desperately. Elias grabbed the rope once more, though Willow was free of the pit now. He looped it loosely around her chest, not to pull her, but to steady himself as much as her. "Come on," he whispered. "Just a few steps. Just enough." Willow took one shaky step and slipped. Her knee buckled, sending her body forward. She stumbled heavily into Elias's shoulder, nearly knocking him off his feet. He braced against her weight, boots digging into the wet earth. Claire lunged forward and caught the rope, helping guide them both upright. The rush of water grew louder. "Higher ground!" Claire shouted. "She won't make it back up the trail. The slope's too slick." Elias looked across the ridge. To their left, the rise was too steep. Behind them, the path was collapsing into muddy sheets, but to the right, a narrow ledge, barely more than a footpath carved by wild animals over decades, climbed upward at a gentle angle. It wasn't safe, but it was the only way. "That way," Elias said. "Keep her between us." The Mustang moved first, stepping onto the narrow ledge with practiced ease, then turning back toward Willow and letting out a soft, urging grunt. Willow raised her head at the sound. Something in her recognized it, maybe comfort, maybe familiarity, maybe simply the presence of another body willing her to live. Elias pressed his shoulder against Willow's ribcage, urging her to shift her weight. "Easy. Good girl. Follow him." She stepped toward the ledge. Another tremor shook her legs. This time, the Mustang stepped down, pressing its body lightly into her flank. Not pushing, supporting, not forcing, steadying. Willow leaned into that touch, her trembling easing just enough for her hooves to find the ledge. The coyote bounded ahead, tail flicking, glancing back every few steps as if checking to make sure they were following. Claire moved behind them, hands gripping the rope that acted more like a guideline than a lifeline now. Her boots slipped often, but she caught herself each time, face set in determined concentration. Then the water hit the pit they'd just pulled Willow from. A thick splash erupted behind them, followed by a deep, sucking collapse. The mud pit liquefied almost instantly, swirling like something alive. Willow flinched at the violent sound, her entire body jerking sideways, but Elias steadied her, hands planted firmly against her shoulder. "Don't look back," he murmured. "Just breathe. Forward." Step by step they climbed. Wind whipped across the ridge, carrying mist that clung to Willow's coat. Her breath rasped loudly, each inhale sounding like it cost her more than she had left to spare. Her hindquarters shook violently with every movement, and twice she nearly sagged completely. But each time the Mustang nudged her, or the coyote barked sharply, or Elias whispered a soft encouragement she barely heard, but somehow followed. The storm's runoff crashed harder below them, splintering branches and pulling loose stones down with it. The earth trembled beneath their feet. A small cascade of water spilled over the ledge and splashed against Willow's hind legs. She jolted and almost lost her footing. Elias caught her neck in his arms. "Easy, easy. Stay with me." Her head leaned heavily against him, warm despite the cold rain. There was trust in that weight, and fear, and exhaustion so deep it felt ancient. "We're close," Claire called from behind, though she wasn't sure if she meant it for Elias, or Willow, or herself. "Just a little more." They rounded a bend. The ledge widened. A small plateau opened into view, a pocket of flat ground, protected by a natural outcrop of stone. The storm water split around it, running in two streams that passed harmlessly on either side. Safe, not far, but close enough. "Bring her here," Elias said, voice tight with relief. "She can rest there." The Mustang moved first, stepping onto the plateau and turning to face them. Willow stared at it, her eyelids half lowered, her breathing ragged. Then, with a trembling motion that was less a step and more a collapse forward, she crossed the last stretch of ledge and stumbled onto the flat ground. Her legs buckled immediately. Elias and Claire both lurched forward, hands catching her head and shoulder as she went down. Her body slid onto the wet grass, chest heaving, flanks rising and falling in uneven waves. Mud streaked every part of her, turning her silver-gray coat into something ghostly and battered. But she was out of danger. The coyote circled her twice, sniffing her neck and shoulder, then sat down beside her head, tail wrapped around its paws like a small, worried sentinel. The Mustang stood a few feet away, rain dripping from its mane, eyes steady and watchful. Elias knelt at Willow's side, his hand resting on her cheek. Her skin was warm. Her breath, though broken, was strong enough to fog the air between them. "You made it," he whispered. She didn't lift her head. She didn't have to. For a long moment, none of them moved. Not the humans, not the Mustang, not the coyote, not even the wind. The valley held its breath around them, as if acknowledging the fragile, improbable victory unfolding in the rain. Then Willow exhaled a long, shuddering breath, not of pain, not of fear, but of release, and the storm, as if hearing it, softened into a cold, quiet drizzle. The drizzle softened until it felt like the valley was exhaling, each droplet falling with a gentleness that hadn't belonged to the storm just minutes earlier. The air smelled of wet sage and cooling earth. Willow lay on her side, her breaths long and uneven, but slow enough to suggest she had finally stepped out of the shadow of death. Her silver-gray coat was streaked with mud and rain, darkened in places where the cold had seeped deepest into her skin. Yet there was warmth under Elias's hand, fragile, flickering warmth, but real. Claire knelt on the other side of the exhausted mare, gently brushing a patch of mud from her forehead. Her hands moved carefully, not cleaning so much as comforting. "She's dehydrated," she murmured, "and that shoulder. She must have struck something hard on the way down." Elias nodded, though his eyes never left Willow's face. He could see pain etched in her every movement, but beneath it was something quieter, a surrender not to death, but to rest. The Mustang stood only a few steps away, its posture poised but relaxed now that Willow was safe. Rain dripped from its mane in slow rivulets. The coyote settled close to Willow's chin, curling itself into a small, trembling ball. Every few seconds it lifted its head to check her breathing, as though terrified the rise and fall of her chest might stop if it didn't keep watch. Elias rested both hands on his knees and sat back, a wave of exhaustion hitting him so sharply it felt like the entire storm had broken inside his bones. His shirt clung to his back, soaked, cold. His hands shook from effort, fear, adrenaline. He wasn't sure which. Maybe all of it. But Willow was alive. For the first time in years, that single fact was enough to make his vision blur. Claire exhaled softly. "She's got a chance now. A real one." Elias nodded, brushing a tired thumb along the mare's cheek. She took it. For a while, no one spoke. The rain dwindled to mist. The runoff below slowed from a roar to a murmur, carving new paths through the debris, but no longer threatening the plateau. The valley, once trembling with violence, now felt suspended, like Montana itself was allowing them this quiet moment to understand what they'd done and what had been given back to them. Willow blinked slowly, her lashes clumped with water. Her eyes drifted to Elias. He leaned closer, lowering his voice to a whisper shaped by gratitude and disbelief. "You're safe," he murmured again, though the words meant more this time, meant forgiveness and memory and the kind of healing he never thought he'd feel again. Willow shifted weakly, her muzzle brushing the back of his hand. The contact was faint, barely a touch at all, but it carried more meaning than anything he could have said aloud. The Mustang noticed. It stepped closer, lowering its head, slow, deliberate, until its muzzle hovered just inches above Willow's neck. The rain caught in its mane, creating tiny beads of light along the dark strands. Willow's eyes opened enough to meet the Mustang's gaze. Something old passed between them. Not recognition of each other, but recognition of the moment. Two wild creatures, weathered and scarred, sharing a breath in a place where both could have died. Then Willow did something so small and so gentle it felt like the valley bowed its head. She lifted her muzzle and rested it briefly against the Mustang's shoulder. Not long, not strong, just long enough to say thank you in the only language she had left. The Mustang lowered its head in return. Claire covered her mouth with one hand. "My God," she whispered, "they understand each other." "Better than we do," Elias said quietly. The coyote rose then, stepping forward on thin, shaking legs. It moved to Willow's face and nudged her gently, letting out a soft, almost questioning sound. Willow opened her eyes fully and exhaled against the small creature's fur. Elias swallowed hard. "You found me," he whispered to the coyote. "You didn't run. You didn't give up." The little creature blinked slowly, ears twitching as if in answer. It looked nothing like a hero. It looked cold, thin, half-starved. And yet, without it, Willow would be gone. The Mustang shifted its weight, giving a final nudge to Willow before stepping back. Its work was done. It looked toward the trail, toward the wide valley below where the storm had left long scars across the earth. Elias reached out a hand, but he didn't touch the animal. He knew better. Instead, he offered a quiet nod. "You brought us here," he said. "Thank you." The Mustang held his gaze a moment longer, then turned toward the open ridge. It moved with the steady grace of something older than its years, each step deliberate until its silhouette blended with the rain-softened horizon. Within seconds, it became another piece of the valley, one more shadow swallowed by the land. Willow shifted again, her legs folding beneath her as she slid into a more comfortable position. The coyote nestled closer, its tail curling around her muzzle as if to shield her from the cooling wind. Elias pressed a palm to her neck, feeling the pulse steady beneath her battered coat. "You're going to make it," he said softly, more a promise than a prediction. Claire exhaled a long breath and sat beside them on the wet grass. "She will," she agreed, "and so will you." The words hung in the air, not dramatic, not loud, but true. For the first time in years, Elias felt the knot inside his chest loosen, gently, quietly, like something finally letting go. Not the past, not the guilt, but the belief that he was destined to fail when a life depended on him. He hadn't failed today. He'd been chosen by a shaking, desperate coyote, by a wounded horse clinging to hope, by a valley that decided one man deserved a chance to make things right. And as the storm clouds thinned into soft streaks of fading gray, Willow breathed evenly beside him, her body warm beneath the shelter of the plateau. Elias closed his eyes. The valley wasn't quiet because nothing was happening. It was quiet because everything had changed. If this story touched you, even in the smallest way, I'd love to hear from you. Just share a simple word or a short thought in the comments. It helps more than you know. And if you'd like to stay with us for more gentle, meaningful stories like this one, feel free to subscribe. I'd be honored to have you here for the next journey.